Ronald Ignace. Presentation topic, Doctrine of Discovery, a Policy of Racial Subjugation and Genocide.
Wait, he is and Staachen Elias Suskun Julp and Elia Gentlemen. I'd like to thank you for honoring me, asking me to stand here. I stand here humbly in the shadow of the presenters of yesterday and those that are yet to come. And I hope that I can leave a small idea with you that you can carry away on this doctrine of discovery. I guess that I just finished my PhD in 2009 at the age of 63. So I'm now 66. So it's never too old to try to learn. Now that my wife's got her PhD, and I thank her for helping me along the way, without which I wouldn't be able to stand here today. And now that I have my PhD together, I guess you can say we're a paradox. I had other things to, and I guess I would like to thank the SNTC for hosting this, and Art Manual, and TRU for being, SNTC for organizing this, and along with Art Manual and TRU for hosting us here, and I'm honored to be in front of Hochheite Benelli to cook this am Knelli to cook beat come iplak as let's chlitum, and I'm honored to be in front of our elders, our chiefs, our counselors, and honored guests and peoples here. I'm not nervous, but I found myself going to the bathroom 4 times. And it's the doctrine of discovery. I looked at. I'm going to look at the issue of doctrine of discovery as a policy of racial subjugation and genocide, but I'm going to try to look at it through the eyes of Sklep Coyote and his people, and which I hope that I can be able to accomplish. And let me begin with this. Harry Robinson is an Okanagan elder who is a great storyteller, and his stories were collected in a book by Wendy Wickwire. She was the editor of his stories. Without further ado, just jump right in and see if I can swim or sink. Is clap, but the Cecil Duka. Apparently, long ago it is said that Coyote had a twin brother. The Creator came down and gave them jobs to fix the land up for the people that were coming. Kamat Yana Sinjas is clap. Yana Nukantasoka Yana the sky is Elkums, it called Cookby. And Jones is with the clap, Mastasas can stas. Kamatli Sinjas is clap loom quans. And the elder twin carried out his tasks related to the creation of the earth as instructed by the Creator for its first inhabitants. However, the younger twin did not. He, unlike the older brother, stole a written document, a paper he had been told not to touch. When he was confronted about it, he lied and claimed that he had not stolen it. And the Creator knew, because when he touched that, the earth shook. and winds blew, so there was a change in the air. And while his older brother was left and when he was confronted about it, he lied and he claimed he had not stolen it. While his older brother was left in his place of origin and became the ancestor of the Indians, the younger twin was banished across the ocean. It is said that was the ancestor of the white people. It is also said that is why the white people can lie, cheat, and steal. The deal with the younger twin, with his banishment, was to come back someday and reveal the contents of the paper to put things right. But upon his return, he began killing his older brother's people and stealing his older brother's land. Let us take a glimpse of the deeds of Coyote's younger brother, the original sin sanctified. The original papal bull was issued in 1452. Pope Nicholas directed King Alfonso to capture, vanquish, and subdue the Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ, to put them into perpetual slavery and to take all their possession and property. Acting on this papal privilege, Portugal continued to traffic in African slaves and expand its royal dominions by making discoveries along the western coasts of Africa, claiming those lands as Portuguese territory. This in turn was followed up by Pope Alexander VI on May 4th, 1493. It's kind of ominous, May 4th is my birthday. Which granted Spain all lands to the west and south of the pole and pole line 100 leagues west and south of any of the islands of the Azores and Cape Verde Islands. While these and others were contested and other papal bulls were issued, these laid down the fundamental sources and foundations for the doctrine of discovery. From this, in 1492, Christopher Columbus was sent out to conquer new lands and bring gold and subjugate heathens. I choke on that word, subjugation. As we should. Upon his arrival in the Bahamas, he was met by Arawaks. It is said that the Arawaks waded into the sea with gifts to greet Columbus. Columbus wrote in his journal, "They do not bear arms and do not know them, for I showed them a sword. They took it by the edge and cut themselves." He went on in his journal, "They were the best people in the world, and above all, the most gentlest, without knowledge of what is evil, and nor do they murder or steal. They love their neighbors as themselves, and they have the sweetest talk in the world and the most beautiful laugh." From his observations of the Arawaks, Columbus concluded in his journal, "They would make fine servants. With 50 men we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want." To this end, in seeing bits of gold and an effort to get gold to impress his financiers, the King and Queen of Spain, thus he ordered the Indians to bring him gold within a certain amount of time. Upon failing to meet their quotas, the Indians had their arms hacked off. Laurier, in his book, The Devastation of the Indies, wrote, "The reason for killing and destroying is that the Christians have an ultimate aim, which is to acquire gold." Samuel Eliot Morse, a Harvard historian, wrote that between 1494 and 1548, the population was decimated from a total of 300,000 down to 60,000. Columbus sent back to Spain about 500 natives to be sold. Cruelties did not end there, but were multiplied. Laurier saw soldiers stabbing Indians for sport, dashing babies on the rocks, and when the Indians resisted, the Spaniards hunted them down, equipped for killing with armored horses and armored plates, lances, spikes, rifles, crossbows, and vicious dogs. Dismayed by all this, the killing of his people, Coyote the Elder travel to see the King of England. And this is getting back to Harry Robins' story. Coyote confronts the king. Coyote tells him, "Your children is coming, lots of them. They come halfway and already for the coast to coast, and they don't do right by my children. Seem to me they're going to run over them. Now we're going to straighten that up. We're going to make a law. And the law that we're going to make is going to be the law from the time until we finish, that is, on this earth." Harry Robinson. The law that the Crown of England responded with after much deliberate delay and denial, I postulate, was the Royal Proclamation, which we will scrutinize later. But before we do that, let us look into the formalization of the doctrine of discovery in the U.S. and how it legally embraced the doctrine of discovery. In 1835, Judge John Cantron, while seated on the Supreme Court of the state of Tennessee, officially identified a principle as part of the law of Christendom, specifically that discovery gave title to assume sovereignty over and to govern an unconverted non-Christian peoples of Africa, Asia, North and South America. Cantron declared that this principle had been recognized as part of the law of nations for nearly 4 centuries, and that it is now so recognized by every Christian power in its political department and judiciary. What of Canada? To answer that, we must look to England. England was an ardent proponent of the doctrine. In 1846, the monarchy granted a commission to the Cabots to discover countries then unknown to Christian people and to take possession of them in the name of the King of England. 2 years after, Cabot proceeded on this journey and discovered the continent of North America, along which he sailed for far south as Virginia. To this discovery, the English traced their title. The charter from King Henry VI to Cabot and his sons traces directly back to the long tradition of the Vatican papal bulls mentioned above. The British Crown was acting on the view that previous papal grants to Portugal and Spain could not rightfully bar the British Crown from voyaging and appropriating lands of the heathens and infidels, which before this time have been unknown to all Christian people. The Johnson ruling confirmed that the Cabot Charter constituted a complete recognition of the principle of the doctrine of discovery. Indigenous peoples were perceived as non-humans because they were unbaptized heathens and devoid of humanity. Out of the doctrine of discovery came an additional racist armor of Terra Nullius. Francis Lieber was a German-American who immigrated to the U.S. in 1827 and became one of the foremost political scholars of the 19th century. Lieber identified the doctrine of Terra Nullius, which referred a land inhabited by heathens, pagans, infidels, and unbaptized persons whom Christians treated in a fundamental sense as non-existing. The concept of Terra Nullius led to the view that the lands inhabited by non-Christians were vacant or unoccupied lands, and therefore open to a right of possession by Christians. Pagans, wrote Lieber, which meant being unbaptized, deprived the individual of those rights which a true morality considers inherent in each human being. It was asserted that the Indians were a savage race sunk in the depths of ignorance and heathenism. If they might not be extirpated for their want of religion and just morals, they might be reclaimed from their errors. They were bound to yield to the superior genius of Europe, and in exchanging their wild and debasing habits for civilization and Christianity, they were deemed to gain more than any equivalent for every sacrifice and suffering brought upon them. The doctrine of discovery was refined and enhanced with the theory of Terra Nullius, an idea became a material force for the destruction of indigenous peoples and their lands. In the court of Johnson and McIntosh, a landmark decision in the United States that held that the private citizens could not purchase lands from Native Americans, this case was used to justify the denial of Indigenous rights in Canada and lays the foundation for the small spots theory. I will not venture into the small spots theory, but I just want to postulate it as another argument, as a backdoor argument for Terra Nullius. In Conquest by Law, Professor Lindsay Robertson states that the reach of Johnson and McIntosh's decision has been global. He continues, in its 1984 decision in Guerin and the Queen, for example, the Supreme Court of Canada, after citing Johnson, held that the Indians have a legal right to occupy and possess certain lands, an ultimate fee to which is in the Crown. Under Canadian law, as under U.S. law, the tribes lost ownership of their lands by virtue of discovery. Let us now see how this squares with the Royal Proclamation of 1763, the views of Indigenous leaders, and lastly, Coyote and his people. The oral history as told by Harry Robinson's story of Coyote's meeting with the king. Coyote talks of making a law that will govern the relationship with the king's people and Coyote's people, to end the killing and theft of the lands. Shouldn't be that way, Coyote says. Should be good to one another. And that's what I come here for, Coyote states. The king responds that Coyote's words sounds like war. If you are a king, he states, and I am a king, we should fight, put up a war. Sounds like that way, the way you talk, at which point Coyote apparently invited the king to go to his window to look outside, only to see the skyline darkened with warriors. That's Coyote's power. That is the power of God given him to come to see the king. Upon returning to his seat, the king stated that he was unlike Coyote, not yet ready for war. Coyote asked twice if the king was not going to fight. This is the second time, Coyote asks. Once you said that we're not going to fight, we can make a paper. Making out the paper. In the article, in an article by John Burroughs, he writes, who is a foremost scholar, a native scholar in Canada. He writes that after the article of capitulation by France to England, England was eager to win over the indigenous allies of the French to achieve various objectives, and mainly to quiet discontent due to the increasing pressure for lands by the growing number of settlers and the war with the United States. The English interpretation of the proclamation straddled contradictory aspirations of the Crown and indigenous nations when its wording recognized Aboriginal rights. These rights and their potential removal were affirmed by outlining a policy that was designed to extinguish these rights. These rights and their potential removal were affirmed by three principles. 1. Colonial governments were forbidden to survey or grant any unceded lands. 2. Colonial governments were forbidden to allow subjects to settle on Indian lands or to allow private individuals to purchase them. 3. There was an official system of public purchase developed in order to extinguish Indian title. The competing notions between and within the parties' objectives were not resolved in the wording of the Royal Proclamation of 1763 because the Crown privileged its understanding of how the land would be allocated, or in my words, inserted in an illusion of inclusion. The effect of this privileging was to limit the First Nations' ability to freely determine their land use, despite non-Aboriginal non-agreement with such a result as evidenced by the Treaty of Niagara. In the following year, Burroughs' research found that about 2,000 chiefs, or coyotes, warriors, like I call them, from 24 nations. Can you imagine that? 24 nations, leaders, met in Niagara. Attended a conference called by the Superintendent for Indian Affairs to discuss the formulation of principles that would govern the relationship between the Crown and the indigenous nations. Sir William Johnson, Superintendent of Indian Affairs, presided over the meeting. At this meeting, the chiefs clearly stated that they were independent, sovereign nations, which is symbolized in the Turo Wampum agreed to at the Treaty of Niagara. Burroughs writes, "The spirit and intent of the Royal Proclamation can best be discerned by reference to a treaty with First Nation representatives at Niagara in 1764. At the gathering, a nation-to-nation relationship between settler and First Nations peoples was renewed and extended. An interpretation of the proclamation using the Treaty of Niagara discredits the claim of the Crown to exercise sovereignty over First Nations. Sir William Johnson, in 1865, indicated as much when he stated, 'I am convinced they never mean or intended anything like it, and that they cannot be brought under our laws, neither have they any word which can convey the most distant idea of subjugation.' However, gradually as the whites, and now I turn to the Laurie Memorial, which states, however, gradually as the whites of this country became more and more powerful, and we less and less powerful, they little by little changed their policy towards us and commenced to put restrictions on us. Their governments has taken every advantage of our friendliness, weakness, and ignorance to impose on us in every way. They treat us as subjects without any agreement to that effect and force their laws on us without our consent and irrespective of whether they are good for us or not." The Lorien Memorial, 1910. As the British had privileged its interpretation of how lands were to be managed, this privileged interpretation was fortified by the ruling of Johnson and McIntosh, in which we were defined and our rights delimited. It is asserted that they are of that class who are said by jurists not to be citizens, but perpetual inhabitants with diminutive rights. It defined the nature of Indian title to lands as a mere right of usufruct and habitation without power of alienation. By the law of nature, they are not acquired a fixed property capable of being transferred. The measure of the property acquired by occupancy is determined according to the law of nature by the extent of man's wants and their capacity of using it to supply them. It is a violation of the rights of others to exclude them from the use of what we do not want and they have an occasion for. Upon this principle, the North American Indians could have acquired no property interest in the vast tracts of territory which they wandered over, and their rights to the land on which they hunted could not be considered superior to that which is acquired by the sea by fishing in it. The use is in one case as well as in the others not exclusive. According to every theory of property, the Indians had no individual rights to land, nor had they any collectivity or in their national capacity. For the lands occupied by which each tribe were not used by them in such a manner as to prevent their being appropriated by a people of cultivators. All the property rights of civilized nations on this continent are founded on this principle. The right derived from this discovery and conquest can rest on no other basis, and all existing titles depend on the fundamental title of the Crown by discovery. Recall further up, Coyote left it up to the king to draft the law, And he left it at that, to which I wondered why. And I believe the reason being Coyote had lived by laws that the Creator had laid down, which his younger brother was also to live by, but did not. The law that he had requested the king to write up was to govern the king's conduct in relation to his older brother's people and not to privilege his position over them. Let us look at some of Coyote's laws and see how his people viewed and lived by those laws. The foundational law of Shuswap national sovereignty was handed down from the Creator and founded by Coyote, is carried down through the ages in our oral histories. First of all, let us look at the origin of Coyote. At the beginning of the earth was very small, but it gradually became larger, emerging more and more from the waters. The people who inhabit the earth during this period partook of the characteristics of both men and animals. They were called spectacles, from which our spectaculars come in our oral histories, our stories. Some were cannibals. At that period, many kinds of animals and birds and fish did not exist, nor many kinds of trees, plants, and berries. The earth was much troubled with great winds, fires, and floods. In those days, the Old One sent Coyote to travel over the world and put it to its rights. Coyote, or Old Coyote, is constantly mentioned as the most ancient of transformers throughout these stories. Coyote is often associated with glaciers and mountaintops. Coyote's house is said to be in a glacier. According to others, it is in the upper world. The latter is described as a prairie occupying the top of a plateau with steep sides. Tate. Old Coyote, he is called, Uncle Coyote by some, was the ancestor of all Indians. It is Oka. He had many wives. From those are descended the Thompson, from others the Okanagan, and still from others the Shuswap. And at one time, they all spoke the same language. And that's who Coyote is. Coyote lays down his law of supreme authority. Ukasasuka is klap. Motokananan schan. Mutachalch mentum tmiste udamkum. Jotis as tullentum kamas jokus the chance, tullentum is klap. Mias is klap as jut. Ganamatli as chilm as jut as chinschatzelp. Danix and dulms and Elliot called cookby and Alien tmich as chintach as yum as chintach tmich yums the tlaak as knochen saltend is the tlaak. Quantix aux as chinschin. Kamas damas christian. Yem kuchisium as called cookby das elks the chilm and jatwa. Manuchent yana yin tmim, manuchentin das ptak. Kamas damas mas nuchentintas u achen elia yam yin tmim ptak sotlacha jauske ich menstruacht das knochen twacht as damas ken hitchen das elks das daus as ken hitchens elks. What is all that? One day Coyote was confronted by a couple of coastal transformers as Coyote was sitting on a stone, watching them as they approached. They tried to transform Coyote, but were only able to change his tracks into stone. And you could still see Coyote's tracks in that place. And to me, I want to go there. That's my Mecca. Therefore, the marks of Coyote's feet may be seen in this stone at the present day. Coyote sat with his chin resting on his hand and stared at them while they were trying to metamorphosize him. When they had failed, he cried out to them, "You are making the world right, so am I. Why try to punish me when I have done you no harm? This is my country," he says, he is clear to point that out. This is my country. Why do you come here and interfere with my work? For I will not interfere in yours. If I wish, I could turn you into stone. But as you have likely been put into the world like myself to do good, I will only allow you to pass, but you must leave this country as quickly as you can. We should be friends, and we must not interfere in each other's work. If you unpack that, that is a dark hole, but it forms the whole nationhood and all the laws and governance that are involved in a nation. And in this fashion, I argue, Coyote repudiates the doctrine of discovery and lays down principles of how nations ought to relate to each other. Let us now briefly turn to Coyote's people, the godless heathens, to see how they lived by the laws handed down from Uncle Coyote when confronted by the descendants of Coyote's younger brother. For this, I turn to the Laurier Memorial of 1910. I won't ask how much time I got, so For this, I will turn to Laurier Memorial of 1910. In it, all the chiefs of the Okanagan, the Thompson, Shuswap, stated that when the first Europeans came among them, the chiefs, reigned supreme in their respective homelands, in which the boundaries between them was recognized and respected. And they made a powerful connection that all the necessities of life were obtained from the respective countries, and that their peoples of each tribe had equal rights of access to all that they required. So there's no boundaries between communities. You could, as a Shuswap, I could go anywhere in Shuswap country to make my living, to feed my family. In fact, they stated that the ranch, which they used as a metaphor in the memorial, of each was the same as life itself, for without it, they could not have lived. So that's how strongly they connected their life to the land. It's the same as life itself. The powerful. But we can see where they talk about they had supreme authority with boundaries recognized. And with that previous story, you can see where that idea that came from. They were carrying with them and living by the laws that were handed down from the Creator through Coyote to our ancestors and passed down through our oral histories through the ages. And in 1910, they were still living by them and respecting and honoring those laws. To the uninvited guests in our house, they extended an olive branch and stated that these people, while uninvited guests in our house, we must be like brothers to them and treat them hospitably. As long as they show no hostile intentions, we will share equally in everything. Half and half in land and water. What is ours will be theirs, and what is theirs will be ours. And we will help each other to be great and good. They were soon disappointed by their guests and asked themselves, what have we got for our good faith and friendliness? They treat us as subjects without any agreement and force their laws on us without our consent. They say that the Indians know nothing and own nothing. They treat us as less than children and allow us no say in anything. They enforce their laws one way for the rich white man, another way for the poor white man, and yet another for the Indian. This is how our guests have treated us, the brothers we received hospitably in our house. Because of this, my chiefs of 1910 said, we condemn the policy of the government towards the Indian tribes of this country as utterly unjust, shameful, and blundering in every way. We denounce as being the main cause of the unsatisfactory condition of Indian affairs in this country and the animosity and friction with the whites. To all of you here, I ask that you embrace this condemnation of government policy as unjust, shameful, and blundering in every way, and demand that the governments do the right thing. Even then, our fight is not with the ordinary citizen who came here in good faith. Our fight is with the government. However, you and the ordinary citizens have a duty to see that the government does the right thing, for something at this time retards those governments from doing the right thing. I like the word retards that they use. So, to recap and in closing, most importantly, our stories give us the moral foundation of our society, connected to ancient law. Ancient, I can never pronounce that word right. I always get ridiculed by Marianne for mispronouncing it. Ancient. It's my Shuswap accent. Most importantly, our stories give us the moral foundation of our society, connected to ancient law, but give us direction for our future as people, communities, and as a nation. In Shuswap, the ancestors of the present generation left a legacy of experience and knowledge handed down through countless generations that, if we connect the dots meticulously, provides moral and spiritual foundation of Shuswap society. The laws, or the sky. Sky is a peculiar word. If I were to ask some Shuswap people today, what if I say sky to you, tell me what it is, they would probably respond paper. But sky, before paper came along, meant rights or laws. Because when the government came and started writing deeds on the land, it gave you the right to the land. So that got the name of sky, but people referenced it as paper, as opposed to what was on the paper. The law or sky that shows Shuswap how to act toward one another with respect for all the living beings on the land that give life to the people. Shuswap or oral traditions have for countless generations given Shuswap and other interior peoples equipment for living. They show by example how to behave and how not to behave, and what are the social, moral, and natural consequences of past ancestors' actions. They remind the present generation of the names and the history of places throughout Shuswap territory, in turn connected to rock paintings and to rock formations where past peoples were frozen into stone. Ult. And ult is a very ancient word. The definition of ult in English is the utilization of one's energy to transform matter. And that is the universal, that's what governs the universe, energy being transformed into matter, matter back into energy. So it can be stated that our people had a universal conscience from the beginning of time. So none of this parochial BS that we've been accused of having. The past actions of the spectacular transformers manifest in the connection between stories, place names, and features in the landscape, anchor experience to the land as collective memories, and represent Shuswap deeds to the land. They document how the ancestors of the Shuswap obtained, recognized ownership of the land. Moreover, they connect the Shuswap as a people to essential social norms and values, providing social, moral, and political lessons for the present and the future. They provide the charter for social institutions of the Shuswap nation. In that sense, they represent Shuswap law. In summary, and contrary to the doctrine of discovery, from Coyote we have our values and principles. Embrace respect, abide by reciprocal relations, and recognize their importance. live by and with the knowledge of the environment and ecological and social relations among species, have and abide by laws of conduct with each other and between nations. So from this day forward, let us pledge that no one's knowledge ought to stand in the shadow of another's. Thank you and good day. I don't know, you want questions or comments?
We have some time, so it would be a good place for questions for Ron with respect to the doctrine of discovery and like stories, those kinds of things. How is it that the doctrine of discovery fits into our stories? No, stay here. So questions?
Nathan will answer all of that. Comments, if not.
The question up here.
Dr. Ron, in that storytelling you've been doing in the nation, what were those three categories of stories? There's three layers, levels, and I know one was when the peacemaker went through our territory and then gave us more instruction.
Well, there's we got our specklers from the people of the speck, that is Coyote and the Transformers, right? And then there's the Slachayim, which is the stories from our people's experiences on the land with each other and with other nations that they've told and handed down. And then there's just the individual life lived experiences of you and I.
Why are they important? That's the question.
Because, well, I mean, they all have, there's a dialectical relationship between all of them. They each inform each other and add and enrich to our knowledge and of the land, the resources of our history and our relations with ourselves and with other nations.
One of the big challenges today is education. How do we tell the stories so that our children know them, the kind of stories that Ron is talking about? What are some of the strategies, Ron, that you see? You're involved with language learning and how the stories are really embedded in the language in so many ways. And in today's world, that's a bit of a challenge, just the language issue as well as the story. How do you make them both sort of come to life?
One of the ways that we tried was we did an experiment this last summer. We created a storytelling course instead of having it in the classroom, and instead of having it over a semester where you have 1 hour a week. What we did is we compressed it down into 6 days, and we took it out on the land, and we took it to our first starting place was in Splachin at their power grounds in their underground house. And so we jokingly said, we are launching an underground movement here. And we had people, we had different ages of people, and I thank the Smemel Society for sponsoring that and agreeing to that experiment. And we had 25 people come in, and some fantastic things happened. And the way we would, Dr. Marianne and I would tell a story, and we would unpack the story. Stories are such that you cannot understand the whole significance. Even the little story that I told here is dense like a black hole. It takes time to unpack them and to understand their full significance and meaning and applications. You can't just define it at one moment. And we would have the students then play out the stories, role play the stories, and with an elder if possible, and it was great fun, And what came out of that was, as I've often said in the past, we're like a broken cup. Our culture and our history and our language are scattered throughout our communities. But we have to take the time to collect it all up and glue it back together. And what was happening at the storytelling was that songs came out and became attached to the story, dances. And so we could see the stories, the songs, and the dances coming back together. It was I was so excited by it, and so were the people that took part in it. And we took that. Then the next place that we took it, and as we traveled, we went out on the land where there's so many stories. Like there's Ignace travels from all across through here, travels through here, transforming cannibals into useful things that would cause us harm. Today, I often say is that we are once again visited with all kinds of cannibals that are causing us great harm, from racism to Indian Act and so on and so forth. But let not get detracted here. That we need to at least to come back to transform all of that. But then we took it to Skeetus in my community. And the elders came out and worked with the students, and they loved it. They had great fun. Young kids were involved as well, And the last place that we went to was, Bev, thank you for inviting us to, is that right? I got yeah, to her camp. And that was our last 2 days there. And I think that's where I believe is taking our stories back on the land, and people that saw those places where that the transformers carried out their work, as Coyote would say, that I was given this work. They could see concretely where that took place, and it attaches you back to the land, ties you to the land. And so now when the students that took that class go by these places, immediately they think of the story. The land starts telling them the story. There's tons of stories out there that we've not been able to see, and as such we cannot hear. So that's and our stories are take you, define and reaffirm and your identity and tie you to your place. And and to me, I think our stories are the game changers of the day. Will be, but we've got to work at it. We've got to create a resurgence of storytelling.
I want to thank you for your brilliant presentation, and I found it so fascinating to see the juxtaposition of traditional understandings with the mentality of worldview of the colonizer. And in particular, I was struck by the way you were referring to the privileging of their interpretation. That in other words, the colonizers privileging their own interpretation. And it reminded me yesterday of mentioning the creation of rights of sovereignty through symbolic acts, which is something that they did with their planting of flags and crosses and so forth. But when you take that and just change it slightly, it's really the pretension or the claim to create rights of sovereignty through interpretive acts. Because these symbolic acts are all about interpretations, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could follow up on my little comment. How you understand that their privileging of their own interpretations over the interpretations that have been here for thousands of years based on these, or that are embedded in the stories that you're telling.
Well, I think it's just basically a chauvinistic mentality, and like Coyote's younger brother, who was supposed to come back after paying his penance from being banished, was to come back and give us the knowledge that the Creator had put on paper, but instead carried on in this lying, and cheating, and thieving, and killing ways. It's how I see it. It's in that fashion.
The whole notion of story, about whose story do you accept to be true? And I think that's what the Doctrine of Discovery does so well for the outside, the non-Indigenous people, is that they've taken their story and superimposed it on our story to the extent that we accept it to be true in large part, or else we would be doing something about it, right? We've somehow accepted a lot of what they say is the truth. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have is to tell our story and to believe it. And that's a huge swing that we have to make in our communities because of all of the fragmentation of the culture and the language that you mentioned, Ron, that our story isn't that strong in the minds of our people in terms of belief. If you believe it to be true, then you act that way. And you can just look around and say, how are we acting? What truth does that reflect in terms of the behavior of our people? It is not, in many ways, sort of acting out our stories, because we're all participants in that story. And I think the notion of that worldview, what we accept to be true about ourselves, we did have a complete understanding of the world, ourselves, how we were to live in that world, how we were to relate to other people, how we were to behave, and all of the things that we would do to make ourselves to be strong and to continue to be strong generation after generation. That evolved over a long period of time, and I think that's our story. And somehow we need storytellers that tell the story and are inspiring, and we start the belief and start that movement. One here, then.
Thank you for that. I couldn't have said it better.
My point is more one about Indigenous stories about the colonizers. Having worked with Indigenous peoples around the world, it's a theme that comes back. My friends in La Perouse, Australia, they have the Captain Cook stories. And actually, they did an event once where they wanted Captain Cook stories from all over Australia to travel back to La Perouse, because that's where he landed. But then the story about that weird white guy showing up traveled actually to other Indigenous peoples in Australia, and it came back. So that was one of the things they did. So Indigenous stories about contact and the colonizers, and basically they thought some of it was a joke, right? Like they were really lost, etc. So the other story that comes to mind is after Delta Move, how the Gitsan actually incorporated a mask of McEachern after he came down with the trial level decision not accepting their oral history. And then they had his mask in their dances. So they had that colonial experience kind of in their story after that, and brought it into their longhouse. The other one that comes to mind is when we went to Colombia and worked with the Indigenous peoples there. They had been subject to very recent genocide, and they killed their leadership off. And so their response in the 70s was to educate all their children to be leaders. And the first thing they did is they told history and the colonial history from their perspective. So they went back to the children and basically said, our leader, Cuauhtemoc, resisted colonization. And so every one of the kids that we would meet, or the younger leaders, could tell their own history of resistance to colonization. And that was I thought that was really empowering.
Well, I've just spent the last 20 years of my life trying to get back to who I am and to remembering the stories as told to me by my great-grandparents and elders around me, and researching and documenting it and trying to now publicize it and getting it so that all of our people are now talking about those stories and telling those stories and creating, like I say, a resurgence of storytelling in our communities. I would hope that there would be others that would now begin stepping forward once they begin seeing and hearing the stories that I tell, and taking those stories. One thing that's a real killer in Western society about storytelling, and I remember it knocked me down once, and I told a story somewhere, and they said, "But you're chewing your cabbage twice. You already told that story." The principle of storytelling is you don't just tell it once, you tell it over and over and over, from one generation to the other, from one year to the other. And that's how, and our stories, you have to understand, are not just stories, they are our school, they are our university, they are our college, they are our trade school, they teach us. They're our political science. They are our physics. It tells you about the universe, the workings of the universe. Physicists are now coming to Indigenous stories and beginning to look at them and realize that, hey, these people had something there that we ought to pay notice to. So it's important that we get back to those.
Our time is up, but maybe just a very brief true or false question to Ron.
The segue, the next storytelling session will be at the October 5th, 6th, and 7th at the Chief Nisconnet Traditional Gathering. So we have the Hell Games, the storytelling, traditional activities, and we're doing a ceremony for our ancestral chief, Nisconnet, on Sunday. But it's through the Thanksgiving week, and I'll enjoy the stories.
Okay. Just comment, yep.
Do you see any way of overcoming the racial discrimination that goes on to original people across the country? You know, like even the RCMP back east in Saskatchewan in the wintertime, very cold night, they apprehend a young fellow and took him miles away from the city and kicked him out, made him walk back. And of all the ones that were taken out, only one survived. And all other discriminations by law and all people supposed to work for our Aboriginal people, the INAC. I believe in the past, I understand stories about INAC selling our land, but they were supposed to be looking after on our behalf. Situations like that. Is there any way that we can overcome racial discrimination? Can you see that?
We got to, first of all, I think, look into ourselves, how we relate to each other from within our families, between our families, and between our communities. There's not too much discourse, and if there is, it's not very positive. And I think if we deal with that and overcome that, we can then move forward. But ultimately, what we have to do, and I often said this, is that we have to rebuild our own institutions that will take care of our people. When we've depended on other people's institutions, it has proved nothing but disasters for us. Look at the residential school, look at the child welfare system, and look at the policing system. All of that is that we've got to disabuse ourselves of those systems and rebuild our own institutions so that we can take care and care over our people and reestablish our Secwepemc national government, not under the Indian Act, outside of the Indian Act, but back in our traditional ways. Then we can deal with the outside forces that come in. And there is historical evidence that in the past we have, through that approach, have been able to repel and push back all those negative incursions into our lives and communities and nation.
Out of respect for the time and the next speakers, we'll just, good discussion. And I think that's what we're encouraging. And of course, Ron is going to be around and he's willing to answer questions. So, thank you, Ron, for your contribution.